Ju përshëndesim të gjithë dhe mirë se vini në episodin e 3 të America Talks këtu në Top Albania Radio, programin I cili tenton të popularizojë edhe më tepër gjuhën angleze përmes transmetimit çdo të premte këtu në Top Albania Radio në një tjetër ditë me shi. Pas ambasadorit amerikan Aleksandar Arvizu dhe Elena Shomos që ishte me ne javën që shkoi, do të kemi një tjetër personazh shumë interesant për të ndarë me ne jetën e tij këtu në radio, ai I cili do të flasë shumë sidomos për një periudhë që e ka jetuar I rritur luftën e ftohtë. Po pikë së pari prezantoj Daniel Capretti, e cila është me mua çdo të prende. Daniel, welcome.
Greetings.
I see you've survived the rain.
Yes.
Okay, and that's a good thing because we need an ark right now to save us. That's how much rain is falling these days here in Tirana. Okay, for you.
So Americans are very proud of their system of government. And this pride even stretches back to 1832, when our English visitor Francis Trollope quoted one man during a speech who said, "A frame of government perfect in its principles has been brought down from the airy regions of utopia and has found a name in our country." That's a lot of pride. Conversely, communism has never been popular, and hence we have the Cold War, which stretched from the 1950s to the early 1990s. And here to discuss the Cold War is our history expert, Marty the Martinator Feast.
Hello, Danielle. Hello out there.
The Martinator?
The Martinator. So you all know the Terminator, who kills people, a man machine that kills people, and then when Arnold Schwarzenegger became the governor of California, he became the governator.
Uh-huh.
And Marty Feast is the Martinator.
Oh, that's right.
He is a man machine who runs around Tirana teaching English 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Perfekte. Do të thënë kemi Arnold Schwarzenegger, I cili nga Terminator u bë guvernator, në rastin e Martin, nga Marti u bë Martinator. Diçka
He kills bad English.
do të thënë gjuhën e keqe angleze, një njeri I cili ka dhënë mësim për një kohë shumë të gjatë e vret. That's good thing.
So, Marty, for those that don't know you, you're actually no spring chicken. So we're going to go way back to your childhood, to the 1950s.
Cool, that's a long time ago.
Yes, even before I was born.
Yeah.
And there has never been a significant communist or socialist party in the U.S. Now, why do you think so?
Well, I thought about this, and America, without being a commercial for the State Department, America is the land of opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
And there are, because of the resource base in America, there's always been tremendous opportunity in America. And there's also upward mobility, and always has been good upward mobility. So you put those two together, and communism doesn't fit. People who are interested in communism are looking for hope. They don't have hope, and they're looking for something to change. That doesn't fit America at all.
And the 1950s were actually the apex of anti-communist feeling in the U.S. Why do you think so?
Well, when I was growing up in the 50s and 60s, especially the 60s, I thought all this was a little bit crazy. But if you look at it now and think about it in 1950 and think about the situation, communism had been around in the Soviet Union for a quarter century, mostly under Lenin and Stalin. They had amassed a tremendously horrible, miserable record of human rights abuse, of repression, and especially under Stalin, of mass murder. And so it's easy to see that there was fear of this kind of thing. Then you flip ahead to the end of World War II, and the Soviet Union emerges with the largest and strongest land army on Earth. And they seem to have taken control of all of Eastern Europe. Then in 1949, the communists take control of China. The following year, 1950, the North Koreans attempt to invade South Korea to communize the entire Korean peninsula. So communism at that time, I can see the rationale of it at that time, appears to be a force on the move. a force that's dangerous and a force that's threatening to destroy the world, take over the world and destroy the world if somebody doesn't do something to stop it. I think that was the rationale behind this hysteria that we developed later.
And you talked a little bit about hysteria, and in that respect, Americans were worried about the nuclear bomb. So many students did nuclear bomb drills at school around this time. Did you?
The students doing that were a little bit before my time. I started school in the mid-1950s, and I heard about these things, but this was a few years before my time. What we had, though, on television, they would interrupt the television programs, even a really good program, right in the middle of it, and they would have, this is a test of the early alert system, and they would have this screeching siren, and then they would say, this is the end of our test, and if this had been a real alert, if this had been a real attack, they said, we would tell you which radio station to go to. And then they would go back to the program, and you missed some of your favorite program.
Did you have those here?
No.
No? How about, did your family have a bomb shelter, which, again, were very popular in the 1950s?
Yeah.
I heard about bomb shelters. I came from a little town of about 35,000 people. I don't know anybody in my town who had a bomb shelter. My own personal belief about this is that I don't want a bomb shelter, because if you're lucky enough that you can get to the bomb shelter and it saves you from the blast, you're going to come out and die from the radiation. I want to die from the blast.
Okay.
And what do you remember being taught about the Eastern Bloc at school?
Well, there was a lot of propaganda, extreme propaganda, when I was in high school. And I remember especially the comparison of East Germany to West Germany, which was constantly being made, and saying that, and touting the fact that because West Germany was so prosperous and East Germany was so poor, that therefore capitalism was so much better. But later on I learned that this really wasn't the case. The United States helped West Germany tremendously with the Marshall Plan, invested a lot of money in West Germany. On the other hand, the Soviets were angry with Germany. And so what they tried to do is exact reparations and punishment, and punish East Germany. So it really wasn't a fair comparison.
I see. But we also still had mock Russian villains like Boris and Natasha on the Rocky and Bullwinkle cartoon show. Mm-hmm. Have you heard about this show?
No, we didn't. But we heard about Rocky and the guy from Russia.
Oh, yes. We'll get to that in the 80s.
Okay.
Different Rocky.
Rocky was a squirrel and Bullwinkle was a moose.
Uh-huh.
And this cartoon show was quite famous in the 1960s. The villains were Boris and Natasha.
Yeah.
They were
Russians.
Russian accents, and they were very stereotypical of what we would perceive of Russians at the time.
Mm-hmm.
I think they were really funny. That came out when I was in high school. And I used to watch it occasionally because it was so funny. But it was just a spoof on these stereotypical characters, and nobody took this as seriously the way Russians were.
Okay. Jemi duke folur pak për periudhën e viteve 50-60 në kohën kur sidoqoftë lufta e ftohtë ishte, po ishte periudha kur komunizmi filloi të shtrinte kthetrat e tij pak a shumë gjithandej. Dhe ka një arsye sepse në Shtetet Bashkuara të Amerikës nuk ka patur kurrë një parti komuniste, është sepse histeria që rrethonte gjithë komunizmin pak a shumë gjithandej nuk ishte fare pjesë e amerikanëve. Do ta pyes Martin më vonë nëse kjo ka të bëjë me amerikanët e thjeshtë apo ka të bëjë me ata që udhhiqnin. Sidoqoftë, fillimisht dëgjojmë një këngë të zgjedhur nga i vet, nga iPod-i i tij, këngën e Beatles, Can't Buy Me Love.
My favorite Beatles song.
Let's hear. So you listen to a lot of Beatles, right, Marty?
I love the Beatles. The Beatles were the big band that was around when I was in high school.
Uh-huh.
This was the time of the British invasion, we called it in America.
Yeah.
All the British music came to America, and the Beatles were by far the best.
Yeah, and you always you put yourself to sleep with these kind of songs, right?
This is my music, you bet.
Okay, I was actually going to ask you about, do you think simple American people did the thing that they in a way didn't accept to have a communist party, or didn't accept to be like, as so many countries around the world, like in a way they got someone who imposed the communism on them, as we here in Albania have. Po e pyes pak, a ishin amerikanët e thjesht, ata që në një sens ju imponuan komunizmit për të mos u bërë pjesë, qoftë edhe në Amerikë nuk ka patur kur një parti komuniste, që është shumë e çuditshme.
Well, it's interesting that when I was growing up, there was so much anti-communist feeling, and the government was so strong about this, that at that time, I remember when I was like 16 years old applying for my first job. And then for many years after that. Anytime you applied for a job, on your job application, there was always a line that said, I am not now, nor have I ever been, a member of the Communist Party. And you had to sign that, otherwise you couldn't be hired at McDonald's.
Wow. So that's it was the leadership kind of thinking, in a way. Okay. Daniel?
So let's go back to when you were a young man in the 60s and 70s. What was your impression of communist countries?
Well, I really did see that there was repression in communist countries, and that was pretty well known and pretty well documented. But there was repression to an extent in my own country. So I didn't see that it was necessarily much worse. It was a different type, and these were poor countries. And I saw that there was a difference in economic resources.
And how much genuine information do you believe you were able to get about developments in communist countries?
I think there was information available if you wanted to search for it, but no one particularly cared much about finding out much about the communist world, and the Eastern Bloc especially, and the news media wasn't particularly interested in reporting on it.
And Americans at that time were particularly supportive of revolts like Prague Spring and the Hungarian uprising. Why do you think so?
Okay, this is where we have a disagreement. Americans were supportive of the Hungarian Revolution. Well, I think if you look at the Hungarian Revolution as a good example, there was a thing called Radio Free Europe, and they used to send American propaganda into the Eastern Bloc countries. And they sent a lot of American propaganda into Hungary. And this is why I think Hungary expected concrete help from the United States during their revolution. And so when they revolted, there was no military aid, there was no concrete help, there was just a pat on the back and we wish you good luck and a salute. And I think they were very disappointed and very disillusioned with America for what we didn't do and what we couldn't do, because we really couldn't do anything. And then it came to light that the United States couldn't do anything in the Eastern Bloc. Now, if you talk about the Prague Spring in '68, that was a wonderful opportunity for a thawing, for a change, for a great leap forward. But the Soviet Union, we found out, of course, wasn't ready for it, was not at all ready for it. And then we saw that the Soviet Union was pretty close to what the Cold War people had been saying about it all along.
So it was something that countries needed to do by themselves, in a way.
Yes, the United States couldn't do it. We didn't have the power to do it. The Soviet Army was there.
You had the interest to do that, but not the power to do it. Okay.
That's correct.
And you were, let's see, you were about 12, 13 when the Berlin Wall was erected?
Yes, I was about, about 12 years old.
And how did you feel about that?
Well, at that time, it was like the Iron Curtain. That was the symbol of the Iron Curtain.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, it was like, oh, this horrible thing happened. But when I looked at it later on and studied it as an historian, I saw it as not that bad a thing.
Why is that?
And people are going to be surprised at that, yes. Because Berlin and East Germany had this problem of a brain drain and a resource drain. Because anybody with talent would want to get to West Berlin, where they could fly out and make money in the West.
Mm-hmm.
For example, like doctors and professionals.
Mm-hmm.
So they had this constant drain in West Berlin. And so it was a constant cause of tension and anger between the East and the West.
Mm-hmm.
But when the wall went up, then there could be, and there was, I think, an easing of tension between the East and the West, because they weren't threatened the way they had been threatened.
Shumë interesante kjo që po thot Martin Shiz këtu në Top Albania Radio. Fakti që mënyra se si shihej në atë kohë ngritja e murit Berlinit, jo për të gjithë konsideroi diçka e keqe, sepse gjithmonë Gjermania perëndimore dhe lindore ishin në një luftë vazhdueshme mes njëri tjetrit, por për shkak të këtij tensioni të vazhdueshëm, sepse profesionistët edhe truri nuk largohej për në perëndim aty ku mund të bënin para, ngritja e murit në një sens shërbeu të paktën për një periudhë shkurtër për të ulur disi gjakrat edhe për të qenë disi më normale situata aty.
And were people at that time genuinely afraid of being nuclear bombed by Russia?
You know, it was always a possibility. There was always a possibility of a nuclear war. And I think in 1962, when we had the Cuban Missile Crisis, that possibility was brought forth and you know, became more obvious. So it was a possibility that existed, that we knew about, that we lived with. But it's like the possibility I could be run over by a car tomorrow. I'm not going to worry about it today.
Okay, that's some very positive thinking you got there, Mr. Keys. Okay, let's go over to the Woodstock. How old were you?
I was about 20 years old.
Did you went there?
No, I didn't go there.
Why?
I had just
Everybody wanted to go there.
I had just gotten out of the Army. And I had just gotten a job, and I was making money, and I was having fun, and I wasn't going anywhere. I was just enjoying life.
But as a 20 years old during that time, was it Woodstock as they describe it nowadays for people like me who just heard it from the documentaries and from the movies and so on?
It was, well, Woodstock represents this idea the youth had that our society was in many ways corrupt, the American society. And it was corrupted a lot by the Cold War. And there were a lot of people that were rejecting materialism and rejecting the society. And that was the meaning that Woodstock had for many of us. It was the fact that we could go out and build our own society. And this is what Woodstock proved. Woodstock, I think they had room for like 40,000 people, and 500,000 showed up. So then the promoter said, well, it's a free concert, and now we have something to prove. We have to prove to everybody else that we can pull this off, that we can live together in peace, because this country doesn't seem to think it's possible.
Por ta keni kuptuar këtë pjesë sepse ishte jashtëzakonisht e bukur, një kolon zanore e Woodstockut dhe sërish këtu tek America Talks. Jemi në pjesën e dytë të programit dhe do doja t'ju kërkoja të ishit vëmendshëm jo vetëm për faktin për të mësuar sa më tepër edhe nga idiomat që përdoren këtu, por mbi gjitha për të fituar një iPod, sepse pyetja që lidhet me programin do t'ju bëj fitues të një iPodi. Ja u shpjegoj më vonë bashkë me Danielën se si bëhet kjo.
So now we move to the 1980s when Marty Feast was an adult. And as a practicing historian, what information was available to you about communist countries in the 80s?
I was doing my master's degree in the 80s, and I remember that there was a lot of revisionist history around at the time because of the debacle of the Vietnam War. And a lot of people were writing and saying, okay, what mistakes have we made? So a lot of things were available. Information was available, and many people were open to criticize.
And what would a typical textbook of this period have contained regarding the Cold War?
A high school textbook would contain the same types of things that they had when I was in high school. Because a high school textbook has an agenda. It isn't just objective. The agenda is to make the students into good citizens. And so if you make them into good citizens, they're anti-communist. Now, on the other hand, the college textbooks were much better.
Now, I was a kid in the 80s, and I remember everything I saw on television about communist countries was great. And I've just shown Ledian a commercial.
Yeah, it was a Wendy's commercial, actually.
Yes.
An old Wendy's commercial. It was hilarious. I mean, I don't know, you should watch it, guys. Do t'ja u bëj tag unë në faqen time në Twitter e Facebook, ta shihni një reklam të vjetër të Wendy's për të kuptuar se si dukej komunizmi në atë kohë në televizionin amerikan.
And this commercial has a quote-unquote communist fashion show. And the idea behind the fashion show is that for day wear, an older woman comes out in a gray dress with a gray scarf, and she's very serious. And then they call evening wear, and she comes out in the same gray dress, but she has a flashlight.
Yeah.
And then they say
In a swimsuit.
Yes. Then they say beachwear, and she comes out with the same gray dress, and she has a beach ball.
And so that.
And the joke of the commercial is that it's no fun not having a choice. And I grew up with this commercial, and that was the image, this gray image, everybody the same, nothing ever changed. Why do you think this image was pervasive in the 1980s?
And I think there might have been gray everywhere in the communist world, because you have to realize and remember that there's still a recovery from World War II. And these countries many of them were devastated in World War II, and the Soviet Union was devastated in World War II among them. So there was still this period of recovery. They were still poor countries economically. So I think there was gray, probably was gray everywhere.
Were you able to travel to any of these countries, or do you know anyone who did?
I don't know anybody who had interest in traveling to Eastern Europe at that time. There wasn't much there that anybody would be interested in, I don't think.
And during this time in the States, there was a bit of resurgence of anti-communism. For example, in Rocky IV, there was the communist villain called Drago. And I don't know if you saw that, but he was very
Everybody
blonde,
saw that.
blue-eyed, and he hardly spoke. He was like a machine.
In a way, yeah.
What did you think about these types of villains?
I thought he was just stereotypical and he was funny. This is in the 1980s. This is when Ronald Reagan was president, and Ronald Reagan brought back the resurgence of the Cold War.
As an actor himself.
And yes, and some people bought into that, but I don't think most people my age bought into it, because we'd already seen through it and we'd gone past it.
Okay. Danilo dëgjojmë një tjetër këngë nga iPodi I Martit, një këngë e grupit The Rascals, People Got to Be Free. Tell me more about it.
I like this song. This is about freedom, but it's about what freedom really is. Freedom is light, it's fun, it's what everything should be. It's not a heavy thing, it's a thing that's just normal and natural, and that's what the song sounds like.
Okay, dhe ne do dëgjojmë tani The Rascals, People Got to Be Free.
Let's move on to Glasnost. Why do you think Americans were particularly supportive of countries which rejected their communist past?
Well, during that period, as countries one by one are rejecting their communist past, we see the end of the Cold War. We see what looks like the triumph of the United States at the end of the Cold War.
And where were you when the Berlin Wall came down, and how did you feel about it?
At that time, I was teaching high school on an Indian reservation, and I saw it on television, and what impressed me is the fact that these were just normal, regular people chopping on this wall, and they were doing it right in front of the guards. And what it occurred to me then, it really occurred to me that this really was the end of the Cold War.
What do you think the average American today knows about Albania and other post-communist countries?
I'm afraid to say not much. Americans tend to be more self-centered. We're involved with our own lives. We have our own things, and a lot of Americans just don't have much interest in studying about other places, I'm sorry to say.
And as a historian, how would you sum up the Cold War on the American front?
I think the Cold War for America was a tragedy, and there were some tragic mistakes made during the Cold War. And I think the reason was because we formed all of our policies around what we were against, not what we were for. We were supposed to be for democracy, but our policies were based on being opposed to communism. Therefore, we were willing to support anybody who opposed communism, including some very, very seedy characters.
Okay. Now we're moving on to our American English Concept Corner. Dhe Daniel, si specialistja e gjuhës angleze, do të na tregoj ca më tepër rreth asaj që dëgjuam gjatë kësaj ore. Daniel?
Yes, today's subject was the Cold War, and you need a definite article, the, and a capital C and a capital W. And this was a state of political tension and military rivalry between the United States and Soviet countries from World War II to the fall of communism, well, the end of World War II, really. Second, we talked about the Eastern Bloc, and these were the communist countries of Eastern and Central Europe after World War II. We also discussed the Iron Curtain, and this was an idea coined by Winston Churchill, and it's the idea of Soviet countries isolating their people from the West by use of force, hence the Iron Curtain. And finally, we've imported the Russian word glasnost, and this was Mikhail Gorbachev's policy of more openly discussing economic and political issues in the Soviet Union. Now, do you want to win an iPod? Who doesn't? How can you do so? Be the first person to answer a quiz question about this interview correctly. The question will appear on the U.S. Embassy Facebook page before our next episode. Make sure to answer in English and use the Snap app. Remember, don't answer in the Facebook comments or you won't get the prize. For more information, including the contest rules, visit the U.S. Embassy webpage. To listen again, visit the Embassy's official YouTube page. And I'd like to say a very warm thank you to our wonderful guest, Marty the Martinator Feast.
Thank you very much, Marty. If Daniel will allow me one last question, since you teach history, and I know and everybody knows that history is one of the most important things you've got to learn in school. What is your message there to history teachers out there? What should they do in their everyday work to inspire, in a way, young minds?
Teach the truth, first of all, and then allow the students to experience history. Allow them to work with it, to discover it on their own.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Daniel, for being here. Do të jemi bashkë sërish të premten e ardhshme.
Same time, same place next week.
Okay, do të dëgjojmë bashkë miq, natën e mirë, paçi fat.